All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. My name is Katie Earle. I'm the coordinator of the University Express program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. We're all joined here virtually today with Tracy and Josh. And we do have some new folks in here, so just want to get everyone caught up to speed on what we'll be doing today. First thing I want to let you know is this program is being recorded, and we'll try to post it online at a later date. Second thing, as you just heard, it may look like you're the only person in here with us, but I promise you there are other people in here. It's just that we're in an anonymous participation mode. So only Tracy, Josh, and I are able to see the complete list of people in here today. And for those of you who are new, we'll be communicating using our Q&A feature. So you've noticed you don't have a video of yourself showing, and you're muted. You haven't done anything wrong. We'll just be talking with you through the Q&A. So for some of you, that may have popped up right when you got into this event window. And if it's not there, if you wiggle your mouse or poke or touch your screen, depending on your device, you'll be able to see that circle that has a square with a question mark in it. That's your Q&A panel. You can click on that to bring it up, click on it to take it away. And if you don't see that, you can click on the button that has 3 dots. That will give you more options, and you should be able to select Q&A panel from there. Please feel free to type in your questions, send them right away. We'll break throughout the presentation as Tracy and Josh will tell you, but you don't want to forget it. So the default is all panelists, so type in the text box and send it to us, and it'll be there for when we're ready for it. We'll also be doing a poll, so when I release that, that'll pop right up on your screen. You can participate and then submit your results, and then we'll see what everybody had to say. So I want to thank the sponsors of our program, which is my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, and Excelsior Orthopedics, because they help make this program possible. And if you've seen me before, you know I'm going to tell you Senior Services is here for you. If you need anything or have any questions, we're at 858-8526. All right, now let me introduce the speakers to you. So we have Tracy Sculpey. She's the Sustainability Coordinator in the Erie County Department of Environment and Planning. She has a bachelor's degree in environmental earth science from Buffalo State College. Tracy has 15 years of professional experience in the environmental field, and since 2015 has concentrated on environmental sustainability and climate change. Let me flip over to Josh here. Josh Wilson has a bachelor's degree in chemistry and biology from Earlham College. He has 19 years of professional experience working on energy efficiency and climate change. He has worked for Erie County since 2016 in the Department of Environment and Planning. And I'm going to turn it over to Tracy and Josh now. Thank you for being here, everyone.
Thank you. Katie, thanks so much for having us, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in to attend. We're really excited to get a chance to talk to you about what we're doing in Erie County. And also we're going to, the second half of this presentation, we're going to talk about some things that you can do. So let's just get started. So just as an agenda, as I said, we're going to start off by talking about our internal operations carbon footprint. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But really, the county has different ways of looking at climate change, different abilities to rein back in climate change, and internal operations is a key piece of that. The second part of our presentation, we're going to take questions after that first part. And then the second part of our presentation is we're going to talk about how you can look at your individual carbon footprint and things you can do to support this big challenge. So, just talking overall about how the county sees climate change, there's really 3 pillars or 3 legs to the stool. We have internal operations mitigation. So that's how from our county fleet and from our buildings and the sewers and all the other different things that the county has direct control over, how the county can take actions to reduce its impacts. A second aspect we have is that we have community climate change mitigation. So at the community level, the county has a responsibility to help implement the state's vision for climate change, but also county-specific actions that can really help out from all kinds of things. And Tracy's going to talk a little bit about this, but from working on complete streets, so there's bicycle lanes and places so people can get on buses and all that works well, to our energy system and how we can green our energy system. The final leg of the stool is climate adaptation, and this is about making the county more resilient. So there's going to be climate change impact Erie County, whether or not we are able to rein in climate change. Climate change is going to happen to some degree at least, And so the county really has to protect the community. We have to look at life and property in the community and how we can do things to really set ourselves up to reduce the impacts of inevitable climate change. So today, though, as I start off on our agenda, we're going to talk about internal operations. And just first digging into some of the background, and just as a kind of a baseline assumption for this talk today, we're not really going to talk a lot about the science of climate change or whether climate change is happening or not. The county has looked at the science, as has the state, and we've decided that climate change is happening and we need to do something about it. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about, just, hey, this is the background. And, many of you may have seen some slides like this, but just looking at, this is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're talking about parts per million carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is a gas. It's one of the several gases that make up the atmosphere, the air we breathe. And what you see is that over the hundreds of thousands of years, carbon dioxide has been in a relatively narrow range between 180 and 280 parts per million. And what we see since industrialization, when humans have kind of started to really change the earth, and most importantly, we've really started to burn a lot of fossil fuels. So taking those fossil fuels, which are underground and really weren't part of the atmosphere, and pull them up and burn them, we're starting to have a real significant impact on climate change. And just to today, what you can see is that we've reached more than 400 parts per million, and the projections are by the end of the century, we're going to be way higher than that. So the next question is, well, is this causing anything to happen? And the science is pretty unequivocal. It's completely clear that this is causing things to happen. So this is a lot of detail on this slide. I'm not going to go through it, but what you can just see is these are time scales of 1940 to present. And what you see is on a whole set of indicators, we're seeing climate change happening. This isn't something we're projecting is going to happen. This is what scientists have measured is actually happening. And so we're seeing air temperatures rise, sea levels rise, specific humidities rise, sea temperatures and ocean temperatures rise, sea surface temperatures rise, and temperatures on land rise. And I don't need to tell you this because living in Buffalo, we've seen this too. Other indicators are going down. And most importantly, as we've all seen in the news, glaciers and sea ice are decreasing. For the first time, we're seeing the Arctic Ocean free for shipping travel. This has never happened in human history that we've had year after year where the Arctic Ocean's open. And we're seeing glaciers on Greenland and also in the Antarctic really start to calve into the ocean and decrease. So this is creating a set of threats to Erie County. I mean, obviously there's threats to the world, but at a local level, we're actually currently conducting a threat assessment. We're seeing that rain events and flooding events are increasing. And if you look at the science on climate projections, we're seeing that those events are going to get more impactful as time goes on. Wind events are becoming more impactful. We're seeing heat waves like we haven't seen before, and we're also seeing invasive species in vector-borne disease. Vector-borne disease means things like Lyme disease that are hosted by ticks. Some species of ticks are starting to expand where they're located, and they're bringing in diseases like Lyme disease. There's other diseases too that could follow. There's mosquito-borne diseases also that, if you look at climate projections, those new species of mosquitoes will come into our area and can start to cause disease in Erie County. Some of you may have heard people talk about Erie County being a climate oasis. We've been looking at it in my department pretty closely, and we're not a climate oasis. Some of the impacts are going to be less in Western New York and by the Great Lakes than they're going to be on other parts of the country. But if you look at the big picture and you look at what's happening in the world, there's no oasis from the economic disruptions, the disruptions to food systems. These things aren't something we can hide from. They're things that we need to kind of look directly in the eye and take action. And that's what we're doing. So I'm just going to look at one slide of one particular threat, which is heat events. So thinking about heat waves. And I just could not share this slide with you. It's a little confusing. The yellow bars are under a low emission scenario, so that's if we really clamp down on our emissions and reduce greenhouse gases. And the red is business as usual. If greenhouse gases continue to rise at the end of the century and climate change just goes forward unabated. And the bars on the big chart that you're seeing, those are number of 90-degree days per year. So what you're seeing is between 1961 and 1990, on the average year, we just had a few 90-degree days, right? 2 or 3 a year was a lot. What we're seeing right now, and we've already had almost a week of 90-degree days in July, right? We're seeing that we're projecting to have 10 90-degree days per year. But that's just getting started. If we look out into the century, we're seeing by 2040, we're going to see under the business as usual scenario, upwards of 25, 30 90-degree days a year. And by the end of the century, we could see most of a summer being 90-degree days. The inset box, which says days over 100-degree days, shows you what we're expecting by the end of the century for 100-degree days. And that's even scarier. 1,400-degree days a year by the end of the century. Really what's happening is our climate in Buffalo is becoming more like a southern climate. And our other country folk in the southern part of the country are going to see whole summers that are becoming really, really hot. And water scarcity and all those issues that go along with it are going to become really intense. There's nothing we can hide from this. We've really got to just address it. So this slide, I'm going to go through this really quickly, but there's a lot of health impacts to climate change. And really, some of this slide in particular talks about health impacts from thermal vulnerability, from those heat waves. Parts of the country, like if you lived in Arizona, you would think that, oh, as the country gets hotter, as the world gets hotter, places like Arizona are going to have a hard time dealing with high temperatures. But actually, those places already have a lot of infrastructure to deal with high temperatures. Almost everyone has air conditioning. Their roofs are very insulated, and there's just systems in place to take care of people and deal with high event days. In Buffalo and in Erie County, we are very vulnerable to high temperatures. If we get a heat wave where there's 100-degree days, health vulnerable people who are vulnerable to high heat are really at risk, and we really don't have an infrastructure to help them. Even like with COVID, as we've seen, our cooling centers have to close down. How do we do cooling centers with COVID? But even if the cooling centers are open, that's not enough if we have these really high temperatures. So Erie County needs to prepare for that, and also we need to reduce our emissions. So what are we going to do? And one of the first things that recently happened, this is in 2016, is county executive polling cars signed onto the Paris Accord reductions in climate gases, in greenhouse gases. What this basically meant was that in 2016, when the federal government decided that it was not going to participate in the Paris climate reductions, we were basically withdrawing from the world stage and saying we're not going to work with the rest of the world to reduce climate change gases, greenhouse gases. Our county, along with many cities and counties around the country, we said we're, as a community, this is too important. We can't wait for the federal government, and we're going to sign on and work to make changes. So this is a good anecdote, and I can't take too long in this, but our county executive, usually if he writes an executive order, that's something he delegates to departments. They draft it, it comes back to him, he makes the final decisions. On this day, the day after the withdrawal, county executive polling cars came into the office early that morning. He drafted this himself. He ran it past some of his senior executives, but was totally like just from the heart and something that just had to be done right away. And we have a lot of respect for that. And that really put a lot of wind in our sails as staff to have the room to maneuver, to really organize an effective response. So it's been really exciting for us. The first step for doing a greenhouse gas inventory, for doing action on climate change, is getting a handle on what our emissions are. We can't measure what we don't, we can't manage what we don't measure, right? That's like kind of an axiom for business. You've got to be able to measure things, measure your performance. First off, figure out what your baseline is, and then see how you're changing. So what this slide shows is that against a baseline of 2005, that's the Paris Accord baseline year that we're trying to do emissions against, right? You can see how the county's emissions have been reduced. And I think that you can probably see my cursor. And what you're going to see is that in 2005, electricity was the biggest part of our footprint. It was a large part of our footprint. Other big parts of our footprint were natural gas, which is the blue on the bottom, wastewater, biogas, so that's gases coming off of our sewers systems. We also have a lot of emissions from gasoline, from employee commuting, and lower emissions from our fleet. So the total fleet emissions are shown in red. Then you move forward to 2014 to 2018, which you've seen that these emissions have come down quite a bit. The biggest source of reduction has been our electricity-related emissions, that purple bar. And that purple bar has to do with, I have another slide in this, but that has to do with just changes in the overall grid. So these are changes that happen because New York State has kind of led the way in moving away from coal and moving to renewable sources of energy. We've also, though, seen significant reductions in natural gas. We've also seen reductions in our fleet emissions as our vehicles become more efficient. And those reductions, although they're smaller, it's harder to see the reduction between 2014 and 2018. We have made reductions since then. Our original target was 28% reduction, and we met that pretty straight on, pretty early on, just because of some of the reductions that have happened and continue to happen. But there's much more to be done. So this next slide, it goes into a little more about those electric reductions, because I think this is kind of interesting. And this is my last slide in the greenhouse gas inventory. As Tracy could tell you, I would talk everyone's ear off and put everyone to sleep if you let me on this topic. But what we've seen is that the real big reason that Western New York's electric grid emissions have come down and our overall footprint has come down is because of this move away from coal. In 2005, around 30% of our electric grid was from coal. Our electric supply came from coal. What you see is that by 2014, that was almost zero. And today, there are no coal power plants in Western New York. We still import some energy that's coal-related, but we do not produce any coal energy now. We've always had a lot of hydro energy, and we've had a lot of nuclear energy. The blue bar is nuclear. The purple bar is hydro. But the big expansion has been natural gas. So natural gas has just blown up. What you don't see so well, especially because this is 2014, I should update this slide with a more recent slide, because we've really seen a big expansion in wind energy, in solar energy in recent years. So those new renewables, those additional renewables that NYSERDA and New York State are working hard to put into our economy, those are really starting to take hold and really push down our emissions. So that's exciting, and that's why we've seen our big emissions reduction, but we've got a lot more to do. And then I'm going to hand this over to Tracy, and she's going to talk about that.
Thanks, Josh. So in 2015, I was brought on as the sustainability coordinator with the direct goal to develop a climate action and sustainability plan for our internal operations. To do that, I had to first start a green team. We needed people from every department to look at our internal ops and get together and talk to each other and figure out what it is that we're doing and how can we make changes that are going to impact our emissions, our carbon footprint. It was brand new. This really wasn't something that happened. Believe it or not, our departments really didn't talk to each other a lot. There really wasn't a committee that was formed that had all these people in place. So when I came in, that was my biggest thing, was to come in and get these people in the same room and really start talking about what we could do together and break down those silos of government departments and work together to get this done. So we formed the green team. It included representatives from every department in Erie County, including those that are from other elected officials. So that's a really important piece of it. We had the ledge sitting in on our green team. We had a representative from the sheriffs and the county clerks. So really people that didn't necessarily, try to come together. We're in the same room trying to focus on developing this plan and to identifying strategies that we could do together and outline so that we could reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So on the right of your screen, you see our goals. We had to come up with goals. We decided to do short-term, mid-term, and long-term. 2020 is our short-term. So we knew a lot of things had already started. There was a lot that was already done that just wasn't necessarily completed. So we wanted to have a short-term goal, 32%, as you saw in Josh's greenhouse gas inventory. We had already reached that 28%. So we knew we could probably, do enough implementation of some of these action items to reach our short-term goal. We did a midterm goal of 2025 to align with the Paris Accord. So as I said, I was brought on in 2015. 2017 was when the Paris Accord was signed. So we'd already started some of these things, but we wanted to align with what they did. So all these goals are against the 2005 background per the Paris Accord. And we decided that we wanted to reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2025. And then our long-term goal is 80% overall emission reductions by 2040. Next slide. So we took this plan and was brainstormed with the green team over the course of a year and beyond. Actually, we still meet, and we came up with the different sectors or the different chapters of the Climate Action and Sustainability Plan, where we then dove in and created implementation action items. We have our buildings and our energy, which, as you saw on the greenhouse gas inventory, is a huge part of our emissions. Waters, we separated the water out into our building water, so that's just the employee use of water, as well as our division of sewage management, because as we all know, that's a whole separate entity for that. Waste management and recycling, transportation, we separated that out as well to commute. So all of the employees, over 5,000 Erie County employees commuting to and from work each day, as well as our general fleet. So our fleets with our parks and our sheriffs, all of that was included in a separate chapter. And then land management included a lot of land use items and parks and things like that. Next slide. So I showed this slide. This is just an example of how we came up with our implementation action items. This is our fleet action items taken right out of that plan. And we came up with the number of measures. We figured out which ones we thought were in our priority. Actually, we prioritized them through this chart, excuse me. So we looked at the greenhouse gas reduction. How much is this going to impact our inventory? How much are we really going to have an impact, from those greenhouse gases being reduced? So that's our globe icon, and we vetted each of the measures with that. Then co-benefits, what else can come from this? Health is part of it. If the commute action includes something like bicycling or, increasing our ability to, as Josh said, like complete streets where we can walk or bike easier. The cost effectiveness was also factored into our priority vetting. How much is this going to cost? How can we do this? Is it something that's a quick, if we do this, it's a low hanging fruit. Those kind of got, those are a higher priority if it's not going to cost that much. And that ties into feasibility. If it's something that is really not feasible, we kind of either made that a long-term goal or we, just lessened that puzzle piece. We gave it less of a feasibility. And so we added all those things together and we then prioritized it. So we have two priorities. Priority tier one is more of the short-term, midterm, and then priority tier two are more part of our long-term goals. Next slide. So executing the Climate Action Sustainability Plan. We developed that plan. It was published in 2019. It was unanimously adopted by the legislature in 2019. And so now we had to start doing it. We wanted to really not just let this plan sit on a shelf. We wanted to make sure that we were able to take these action items that we thought out and that we started implementing them. So through a DEC grant, I was able to secure some funding so that I could stay on board and start implementing some of these action items. The DEC is a Climate Smart Communities grant. It's a program where we input some of the sustainable action items that we have done and we receive points back. So there's a point structure involved with this Climate Smart Communities program where if you reach a certain threshold, you then become certified. And it's across all of the different sectors. We actually created the plan knowing that this funding source existed, so a lot of them, it meshed up really well so that we can start implementing after we published the Climate Action and Sustainability Plan. So we did become certified in 2019 as well, using some of the items that we had already started or that we were really close to completing. We were able to put those into that program and we became a bronze certified climate smart community. I'm now funded again by DEC to continue implementing items from the Climate Action and Sustainability Plan with hopes for striving for silver. So there's a pretty large gap between a bronze certification and silver certification, but you need to do a lot more. But as Josh said, there's lots to do, and this plan does have some community aspects to it. So it's not only internal ops for to gain points on it. And then I just want to say that by becoming a climate smart community certified, we then became a certified climate energy community, which I'm not going to talk about much, but it's another designation that we got, and that that last point that we got was by becoming a climate smart community that we were also able to gain that certification. So slide, I'm going to go through a couple of our current successes just rather quickly. Energy conservation at buildings, obviously that's one of our biggest emissions. We've done a lot of LED lights. We've done high efficiency boilers in a lot of our buildings. We have a project happening right now throughout a lot of our, the largest buildings that we have in our stock. We have over 200 buildings. So they took the largest buildings that we have, and they're really implementing some bold efficiency projects. There's more than 100 measures going into that right now, and they're expected to be completed by 2021. So right now, these projects are in place. They're happening right now, and we should see some great reductions in our emissions at the end of next year. Slide. We have electric charging stations. So fleet transportation is also a huge emission, greenhouse gas emission, part of our carbon footprint, as Josh had mentioned. The county is currently, they've installed 12 charging stations throughout Erie County for those that have plug-in electric cars. There are 24 ports, so each station you can plug in 2 vehicles to this. And they're located all around the county, mostly in parks and on ECC campuses. And there are more to come. They have in the works a handful more at least that they're working to get the infrastructure up and to allow for the community to come and park at their electric charging stations. There is a website that you can go to if you did want to utilize one of these stations. It's through NYSERDA, and I'll put the link up later. I'll have Katie send it out after. But you can look and see Erie County as a whole. It'll show you exactly where every charging station is. Slide. And then the last success that I'm showcasing is our composting facility. This is located at the Alden Correction Facility. This project was 100% due to the Green Team. It was after one of our meetings, the sheriff representative for the Green Team came up to us and said, hey, we have a lot of space and a lot of people that are able to work. What about trying to create some sort of a composting facility? So Department of Environment and Planning then went and found some funding that was available through New York State, and we received that funding and we were able to start this composting facility. Right now, it is, the top picture was when they were clearing out the lot to where they were putting the compost, all the compost down, and the bottom lot, they are in full service right now. And it shows them covering up the food waste. So we are taking all of the waste from the correctional facility right now and composting it. We have funding for future where we're going to hopefully be able to add other municipal buildings, food waste to that pile as well, including the rec building potentially, or the holding center. So we're in works to expand this program, but we're really excited about it. Just because it's direct from the sheriff with a full Green Team measure that came right out of that team. And then the compost that is made from that will be used in our parks. So we're using the material that came out of there throughout all of the buildings and grounds and planting for the parks. And we couldn't have done it without the sheriff's involvement. Next slide. So next steps. My next funding source is again through the through DEC, and it's to create a community climate action plan. So I'm working now with a group of stakeholders throughout the community. We're called the Community Climate Change Task Force, and we meet monthly to start talking about community action planning. It's a lot different than internal ops. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. We have a community greenhouse gas inventory that we're working off of as well. But we're working to try to figure out now we've done our internal ops, let's look out at the community, which really has the biggest emissions. You know, if you look at the different charts, and I think that's going to be shown in a minute, internal ops, we don't have that big of a pie piece when it comes to Erie County emissions. It's the community facing where the biggest emissions are from. We're also working on additional climate smart community actions, including complete streets, as Josh has pointed out, and some energy efficient programs as well. And then finally, which Josh also talked about, the vulnerability assessment is a current project through our department working with UV, where they're talking about climate adaptation and resilience with those key threats that we see in Erie County. Slide.
Yeah, so the next step, do we have any questions come through, Katie, that we should answer?
So we have one question that came through, and I also have one. So can you tell everybody what NYSERDA stands for, please?
Sure, it's New York State. Oh, geez, I should have that right. Do you have it off the top of your head, Joe?
Research and Development Authority, I think.
Development Authority, New York State Research and Development Authority.
Yeah.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
You know, NYSERDA is really the state's energy arm. They do weatherization work. You know, we're lucky in New York State. There's a few states that have really strong energy programs, and we're one of them. So every time you pay your electric bill, there's what's called the system benefits charge. It's a fraction of a penny per kilowatt hour, but it adds up, and it funds all the work that most of the work that NYSERDA does. And so they use that work to help industrial energy efficiency. So they work with factories, they work with local governments, and they also work with individuals helping with weatherization of housing, especially low-income housing.
Thank you. The next question is, what's the status of the planned windmills in Lake Erie?
So our internal operations plan that Tracy was talking about is completely, we're putting it into, you know, we're working on that right now. That plan was adopted in 2019. A community plan, which we're working on now, to reduce the community's emissions of greenhouse gas. Really, we're going to do that in coordination with the New York State Climate Act that was just passed, which is really groundbreaking. If you aren't paying attention to the news on this, the New York State is really forward thinking on this, that we're really looking at the green economy and the transition to the green economy is something that we want to be in front of, not at the back of the train. And so a whole lot of things are happening to make that happen. So as we develop our climate plan for Erie County, that needs to work with what the state's doing, and things like windmills are going to be part of it. Now, whether there's going to be windmills on Lake Erie, that's something that the community needs to decide, right? That we need to look at the impacts and see what those impacts are. For example, there's bird and bat impacts from windmills, or maybe impacts on our fisheries. We need to look at that against the good it can do, right? And so the good is that it can reduce these impacts and can cause really hundreds of years or thousands of years of degradation to our life here on Earth, right? And so, you know, it's hard to weigh those things, and it's really has to be part of a discussion, and there's not going to be anything that happens real quickly. But you know, the role of the county is to make sure all voices are heard, make sure that it's not just, you know, people whose backyard might be a windmill, but also, you know, the people maybe who live somewhere else but might be most impacted by climate change, right? There's an equity issue where a lot of times the people who are most impacted, their voices aren't heard. So that's something the county has to kind of represent, right? We need to make sure everybody's voice is heard, and that these difficult decisions sometimes about citing renewable energy or about other aspects of the way we transition our economy, that it's something that's done justly, that it's something that is done in a way that respects the workers whose jobs might be displaced, so that those workers are able to transition to good green jobs and also it's done in a way that respects property owners' rights and also respects all of our need to have a healthy planet we can live on. So that was a long answer. I sound like a politician, I'm sorry.
There'll be a lot of public input going into at least the community climate action planning process. So that's definitely, be involved and get involved and like Josh was saying, get your voice heard.
In one of our last slides, we're going to go into the next part of our presentation, but at the end, there's an email address that we're going to put up on the slide, and please email us if you'd like to stay in contact. We'll add you to our contact list. We're going to be doing community meetings. We're always looking for community input. When we have reports that go out, we're always looking for the community to give comments. And, we really look to that. Like, we really want to hear what the community has to say, and we try to be responsive to it. So, yeah, thanks for your question. Any other questions?
We have, one more that came through. EPA guidelines, are they doing anything under the federal administration?
The federal government, under the current administration, has mostly pulled back from action on climate change. There were a lot of things that were in the works, and so some of those have continued, but some of the most important things have really been, you could say, withdrawn. For example, under a prior administration, really forward-thinking vehicle emission reduction rules, so those are the mile per gallon rules on vehicles. What's happened is that this decade, we're going to see electric-powered vehicles be cheaper to own and operate than gasoline-powered vehicles. So the government had put in place a set of rules that was urging, it was helping or pushing the manufacturers to kind of move forward on that, just as we've done in the past. But those rules were gutted by the current administration. The same thing for moving away from coal power. So we've really seen a lot of steps backwards, but there are also a lot of people, there was a lot of momentum at EPA, so there were still some good things happening.
All right, thank you. That's it for now.
Great, thank you. So our next slide is, we just talked about our government and really about internal operations and how Erie County is looking at ways to tighten its belt and reduce its impact and really support this overall transition of our economy to a green economy with lower, impact on the climate. And this isn't something we can do alone. So the next part, this is really the more fun part of our presentation. I hope it's the more fun part, is we're going to talk about how you can look at your own internal footprint, how you as a household or as a family, how you impact the climate, and then things that you can do at an individual level. And just like at the county, as we started off by doing a greenhouse gas inventory and looking at what are our impacts across fleet and everything else, now we're going to talk about how to do that on an individual level, and we're going to start by doing an individual carbon footprint. And fortunately, there's good tools for that. So we're going to first do a poll. So my question to all of you is, what is your household's biggest source of emissions? Greenhouse gas emissions, okay? So Katie's putting it up on the screen, and you can click on it right now. But just if you're not sure, take a guess about what your household, and what do you think is the biggest piece of your carbon footprint? Once we get a few responses, we'll move forward. Katie, you want me to just move forward with the slide while they do that?
Yeah, go ahead, and then I can close the poll and share the results in about a minute or so.
Okay. So where we're going to go next is we're going to go to this footprint calculator, and there's a bunch of these online. Tracy and I were looking at them, and it seemed like this one that came out of the Cool Climate group at Berkeley really showed it in a way that was graphical and really helped you understand what was going on. So if you want to just take a look at that link sometime after this, but we're going to go to that website now. So Katie, you want to share those results?
Are you seeing them?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So what I'm seeing is that people think by far 4 out of 10 of our participants thought that, or 4 out of our 6 of our respondents thought that home heating was our biggest source of emissions. Home heating and electricity, our home impacts. So let's go look at the footprint tool and see what it tells us. So I'm going to have to get out of my slides, go to my let's see if I can do this without getting into too much trouble. And Katie, we can take down that poll, I think. So one person thought it was transportation. And so unfortunately, I can't do the inventory and show the results. Just the way this tool works is it starts off with the average for an average American. But what you can see here is that for an average American, transportation is the biggest impact. Now, what we're going to do with this tool is, and you can see this on the bottom. So if you see these bars at the bottom, it's broken into different categories, just like the poll was: travel, home, food, goods, and services. For the average American, travel is the biggest impact. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through and do an example of an emissions inventory for an Erie County resident. So I'm going to put in a zip code. Tracy, what's your zip code?
14224.
So 14224 is probably West Seneca. And so what you saw was that this changed quite a bit just by putting that in. So the reason we're putting in a zip code into the tool is that the tool makes assumptions about what average amount of travel is and fuel economy, but the biggest difference between different communities is electricity. And so just like we were talking before about how New York has very little coal left in its electricity system, we also have a lot of hydro and nuclear that are low emission. Many states around the country have very high levels of those sources of coal, and so they have much higher electricity footprints. So you might find in some states that the home would be the biggest impact. If you were in Ohio, you might find that, you know, the people, most of our respondents thought that home was the biggest impact. Home really would be because their electricity impact would be so high. If you were in Hawaii, you might find the natural gas was extremely low because there isn't much natural gas and people don't heat their homes very much. So electricity would be most of the home impact for maybe air conditioning. So let's go through and make this. I know we're starting to run out of time a little bit. I don't want to make this go long. So I'm just going to go through, but we can now set things like how many people are in your household. So let's do this for a 3-person household. And you see that things are changing just as I did that. And we'll also ask us what our average family income is. And this is just for setting the default values. But it turns out that, you know, the more wealth you have, the more wealth you have, the more money you make, the more money you spend, and the bigger your house may be, or the more you spend on fuel for your vehicles or for a boat, things like that, where someone who has less income doesn't do as much. So people who have larger incomes have bigger carbon footprints in general, which just means they have more ability to reduce their carbon footprint. So for this, let's put in a person who's in the 60 to 80,000, which is about right for an average 3-person household in Erie County. And you can see that our average footprint now is 54.6 tons of carbon dioxide per year. So just keep an eye on that number because as we change things, our footprint's going to change. So our next tab, we're going to talk about travel. And this is something you can do. You can increase or decrease the number of vehicles. And when you make changes, it's going to change this footprint right here. Right now it says that we're 0% better than the average West Seneca household with 3 family members. So let's make some changes and make this right. So Tracy, how many cars do you have in your family?
We have 2.
So let's make this 2. And I'm not going to put in Tracy's numbers. I'll just put in some, you know, maybe some rough numbers. But if we were to change this and say one person drives 15,000 miles and their fuel miles per gallon, they're driving a pickup truck, so they're getting 18 miles per gallon, right? And so you saw our footprint got a little worse, and we now have not quite as happy of a face. And then maybe the other person is driving, you know, 10,000 miles, and they're driving their motorcycle, and so that gets 50 miles a gallon. And so then we see we reduced our emissions by a few tons, and we have a happy face, right? And you could go all through this. And there's these other ones for public transportation, for air travel. We could make assumptions. So, for example, if we made a trip to Hawaii, did a long-haul flight, this is how many one-way trips, so it would be 6 one-way trips for our family of 3. Boy, suddenly air travel is a big part of our footprint, right? Our emissions just really jumped. And car fuel didn't get affected by that, but the air travel just went really high. So just shows you, you can just kind of play with this and see how different actions you would take in your own life would affect things. So let's go to the next one, for housing. So 1,600 is really high. Most people in Buffalo probably don't pay that much in electricity. It's probably using a state average cost, and downstate has a lot higher electric costs. So make us a little more like a typical household of that size. That might be $1,200 per year. Natural gas might be a little less than that too. It's hard to know. It depends on your own situation. You can put in for your family, or you can adjust the overall square foot and it will adjust it accordingly. So that lets you change the household measures. Again, if you click Advanced Audit, you can change between the more detailed and less detailed aspects. The next one, which is maybe a bigger chunk than I would have thought of coming into this before I knew much about greenhouse gas, is food. It turns out that our food supply has a lot of emissions. Something like a quarter of our emissions are from food. And so a lot of our ability to reduce emission is just by making changes to our diet. And that doesn't mean you have to make huge changes, right? It's not that everybody has to become a vegan in order to reduce their emissions. But one thing if you play with this, you'll find out is that our emissions from eating some things are really high and other things are not nearly as high. And it's probably the things that are the highest in emissions are things related to beef and lamb also. Beef, cattle emit a lot of methane. It's mostly burped methane. It has to do with the way they digest and chew their cud, and there's just a whole lot of methane, and that's a really potent greenhouse gas. So if we reduce our intake of dairy and beef, that has a positive impact, but it doesn't mean like you have to give it up. You know, maybe you really like dairy and you're not going to give that up. But if you reduce your family's intake of beef by, say, half, we reduce almost a ton of greenhouse gas emissions just by that action, right? So these little things, not always so little, but they can have an impact. You may not be able to afford an electric vehicle, but you might be able to do some changes to your diet that can have an impact. So I'm not going to make any changes here, but you can just see how that works. Then for shopping, and I'm going to change these to the Advanced tab so you can see what we're talking about. But for goods, clothing, furniture, entertainment, paper, personal care, you could put in all values that kind of match what you spend a month. These are monthly costs, right? And so if you're really into clothes, you know, your emissions are going to be much higher. That added 25% to our emissions for goods and services. So, you know, if I take that back to 400 where it was, that makes us more normal. You know, you could play with any of these, and here's a whole other set for services. You could put in what your services are. You might just want to leave these as default, or you might want to play with them just to see how different things can affect you. I will tell you that healthcare has one of the biggest impacts of the services. Healthcare is super energy intensive. Our hospitals use a ton of energy, and that's not something that you can probably change. That's something that we at the county or the state level as government institutions and working with our community partners, that's something that we need to change as a community. Okay, let's go on and talk about taking action. So this is what's really cool about this slide. And you can see just by those, mostly the transportation changes we made, we get a smiley face because we're 11% lower than the average household in West Seneca, right? 48 tons per year in emissions for a 3-person household. What this lets us do is we can click on these different actions, pledges, what they're calling, but you can just use it as scenarios, and you can, there's a whole slew of them. You can sort them by, I'm just going to get rid of the shopping and the housing ones, right? And just look at the transportation ones. But you can buy an electric vehicle. Not everybody can do that, but if you do buy an electric vehicle, look what happens. There's a huge decrease in your vehicle emissions per year, right? So this might not be the perfect calculation. I'm not sure how it accounted for 2 vehicles and, you know, distributed that, but you know, this is saying that instead of buying gasoline, you're buying electricity, and the electricity is New York Electric, which is relatively green, and so you're having a huge impact when you buy that electric vehicle. Not everybody can do that, right? But what you might be able to do is instead of buying a new vehicle, you might be able to buy a more fuel-efficient vehicle. So instead of driving that old pickup truck, you buy a nice new Ford aluminum body pickup truck, and it has much lower emissions, and you're supporting our Ford factory. And look, we're getting a nice, serious reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if you really wanted to see it, you go back to that transportation one and you put in the actual miles per gallon. You know, there's other things like riding a bike. But, you know, riding a bike isn't something you can do by yourself necessarily. If you want to ride your bike to work, you might need a bike lane. So that's something that happens in partnership with like the county as we work on our bike master plan and on our complete street policies. We make it safer for bicycles, and then you, as our partner, you ride your bicycle and we reduce emissions. So the same thing is true with housing. There's a whole set of emission reduction scenarios here, like purchase green electricity, install photovoltaic panels, PV panels or solar panels, reduce your waste. You can sort these different ways, just a nice set of functionality. So I'd really encourage people to just play around with this, go for that smiley face. I'm going to show you, I don't know if it's a secret, but as Tracy and I were playing around with this, what we found was if you get enough, you actually get a halo. So let's see, oh, look, we got the halo. Look at that, Trace. So if you get it above, maybe it's a 50% reduction, you're basically in carbon reduction heaven. So everybody wants to do that. And hopefully that doesn't mean that we've passed away. It means that we're an angel on earth. So,
the cool thing about the tool is just that you can customize it to your own household and click on and off things that you think that you are able to do, and just see that there are things that you as an individual can do to make a big impact. So Josh, do you want to go to the
and just as I wrap up this slide, Trace, the other thing I want to say about this is, even with all this stuff that you can do yourself, there's no kidding around, right? If we really want to make a transition to a world that's safer for us, and especially for our children and their children, we really need a concerted effort across not just households, but also across industry. We need businesses to be partners, and the county has worked as a founder of the Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable, where local businesses are coming together to reduce their emissions. You need infrastructure for electric cars, just like we're putting in charging stations. You need infrastructure for bicycles. Like this healthcare is a big source of our services emissions. You can't reduce your healthcare emissions. You're not going to not go to the hospital. That's something we have to work with hospitals to do in smart ways to reduce emissions. So this is a big global effort, but there is a lot you can do as an individual, and it's a lot you can do without sacrificing your quality of life, and it's pretty exciting to see. So yeah, check out this tool. So I'm going to come out of this slide. I'm going to go back to our slideshow. Okay, is that showing right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to just breeze through this slide, which is our community greenhouse gas inventory. This is not organized the way the footprint was, but here you can see how your household inventory, which is residential emissions, is the red, residential energy consumption, and then transportation. So really the red and the yellow is the part that's a household emissions in parts, right? There's so many other parts to this. I'm sorry, the blue and the red. There's other parts of this that you can't just do as a household. So it's going to be a concerted effort by all of us, by all of our partners. Okay, so Tracy, I'll hand this one over to you.
Yep, just a list here on, as we wrap up, kind of ties in with the online tools Josh is just using. How else can you get involved? There are many ways that you can help out or just get involved with these community efforts. Volunteer action days, beach cleanups. There are so many not-for-profit organizations and other organizations that host these cleanups. Sign up for those. Household hazardous waste events, the county typically puts on a couple per year, and they're free to Erie County residents. So you go, and if you have a bunch of old oil-based paints or solvents or other gasolines or just household hazardous items, you could bring them to these waste events, and they dispose of them properly there. Recycling your electronics is really important. Invasive species removals, that has to do, we really want to keep native plants here, and they thrive here in our climate, and a lot of times these invasive species will come in and take over, or invasive species as in like the ash borers will come and destroy a lot of our ash trees and things like that. So working with local community groups to remove some of these invasive species is really important. Simple things, reducing your single-use plastic usage. Bring your own bag, bring your own bottle. Purchasing single-use plastic items that are, they're used for 12 seconds a day, or there's some stat on there and then they just end up in the landfill. You use it once and you throw it away. That is a single-use plastic item that does not degrade. It does not go away. It is here forever, whether it's buried in a landfill or not, or typically they end up in our trees or in our storm water, our storm sewers. So that kind of ties into keeping our storm drains clear. Really only rain and snow melt should end up in our storm drains. We should not be dumping anything into those drains. That goes directly to our creeks and our lakes. It is untreated. And therefore it becomes part of our drinking water, and it's where we play. It's where, it's our creeks and it's our lakes, and it's just a pollutant that is unnecessary. People think that it's treated just like our drinking water, but it's not. So keeping those drains clear of even lawn debris is really, really important, just so that the rain and snow melt can be the only thing that enters those drains. And then finally, sign up to be involved. Josh mentioned we have an email address that you can send your contact information to. It goes directly to me. It is, you can advance the slide, Josh, sustainability@erie.gov. That will come to me. I will put you on the list of community members that want to be involved. And anytime we have a household hazardous waste event or cleanup events or anything of that nature, I send out a blast email to that email list so that you can, in fact, be involved. And then we have a fantastic website, erie.gov/sustainability, outlines everything we talked about today, as well as the rest of our programs here in environment and planning, stormwater pollution prevention, our watersheds, the importance of that, our recycling and waste, among other things. So thank you, and we'll finish up with questions again, if we have any. Katie?
Okay. Well, first, thank you both so much for that eye-opening yet empowering presentation, learning about what's being done and how we can all be part of it. I don't have any other questions or comments yet, but we can wait a couple seconds, see if anybody has any ideas or anything they want to find out about. Oh. Put in the
Hopefully we didn't lull everybody to sleep.
I don't think so. You gave a lot of really wonderful information. Oh, question that came through. Any idea when e-recycling might resume?
Unfortunately, the county typically doesn't hold a lot of electronic recycling events through the county. That being said, I know that a lot of towns will have their own recycling. In fact, a lot of municipalities have a place where you could bring your electronics for recycling. So I suggest you go on the erie.gov/sustainability website and you look up the recycling, and they have all information there. I think there were a couple e-recycling events so far this year, but I haven't heard of any coming down the pipeline. So if you sign up on that erie.gov, sustainability.erie.gov list, I blast out those too. Once we have word of things coming up, we blast out those. And then we're also on Facebook too, which they'll put out if there are municipalities having electronic recycling events.
If you email us that email address that's on your screen right now and let us know where you live, we can tell you the exact status for your community.
Absolutely. We can get you in contact. Yes, we can definitely get that information over to you.
Perfect. That person says thanks. We have another question. Is toxic algae bloom getting worse in our area?
That's a great question. I'll field this one maybe. It is my understanding, and certainly with our projections for climate change, our consultant who's working on that, which is a group out of UB, they're predicting we're going to have more problems with toxic algal blooms as time goes forward. I don't know the exact status of where that's at for 2020, but it's definitely something that's on our radar and we're starting to look at. It's not something that I personally know much about, so I can't really speak to it in detail. But that group's looking at it, and as we start to work with our Department of Parks, who has to deal with it front and center because of our beaches, it'll be something we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's directly tied to heat days. So I think I'm not the expert either, but as it's warmer, I think that's where you start getting more blooms.
Yeah, this whole issue of biological changes, kind of unpredictable stuff happening. Our Earth is kind of a delicate system, and so we start to throw this big variable out of whack, which is our weather and especially temperature. There's just like kind of unpredictable things that happen, and that's happening in the face of other things. We have more and more people living on the planet. There's more pressure on ecosystems around the world. There's more humans interacting with parts of nature that haven't happened much before. I mean, I think that's where COVID actually comes from. So I wouldn't point to that as being a climate change impact, but there's just the wholesale change of the planet and the way humans are on it it's causing some impacts, and we're just going to have to, you know, our role in government is we need to be smart about these things and really try to minimize damage and also protect our constituents, right? So minimizing damage is us working to reduce our greenhouse gas inventory and our community footprint, but then also this whole other side, which we didn't talk about today, which is, you know, how do we protect the community from things like algal blooms, but also things like, you know, these heat waves that are going to be coming and things like that. So it's a lot to work on, but it's something that, you know, we can't do alone, and you know, we're ready to go.
Oh, well, thank you both for that answer. The last thing I have come through is thank you both. A lot of great info. Keep up the great job. Enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
So,
this is great.
I think with that, we'll wrap it up. The contact information is there, and just appreciative, Josh and Tracy, for your time and your expertise, and for everyone who joined us here today. And with that, I will stop recording.